The later years of Frankie Lymon. Frankie Lymon rose to fame in 1956 as the lead singer of the Teenagers. With a voice that was unmatched and a natural charisma and stage presence akin to Jackie Wilson, he was considered one of the greatest performers of his era at only 13 years old. For 18 months, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were on top of the world, releasing hit after hit and performing in sold-out theaters across the United States and at the London Palladium. Joe Negroni, Herman Santiago, Jimmy Merchant, Frankie Lymon, and Sherman Garnes were stars. But sadly, their success would soon decline. While in London, Jimmy Merchant received a letter from home informing him that the Teenagers' latest single, Out in the Cold Again, had been released and was doing well. However, on the flip side, there was a song called Miracle in the Rain, which was just Frankie singing by himself. Jimmy and the other Teenagers confronted Frankie about it, and that's when he told them he was leaving the group. This may have sounded like a good idea to Frankie, but it would prove to be one of the worst mistakes in rock and roll history. After his split from the group, Frankie went on to record a multitude of songs, none of which were hits except for Little Bitty Pretty One, which was recorded in 1957 but released in 1960. By this time, Frankie's voice had changed. He no longer sounded like he did during the recording. His high soprano had turned into a smooth baritone. Additionally, he had been using heroin for almost 3 years, having been introduced to the drug by a woman more than twice his age. Losing his signature voice and struggling with heroin addiction led to Frankie Lymon being labeled as a has-been at only 17 years old. In 1961, Roulette recorded 2 sessions with Frankie, resulting in 2 singles, Change Partners and So Young and I Put the Bomb and Young. Neither charted, and shortly afterward, Roulette ended their contract with Frankie. Following this, he entered a drug rehabilitation program and managed to get clean, but then tragedy struck when his mother, who'd been battling cancer, sadly passed away. This loss caused Frankie to return to heroin to numb his pain. In late 1962, Frankie began helping his younger brother Timmy break into show business. While backstage at the Audubon Ballroom during one of Timmy's performances, Frankie met a woman named Elizabeth Waters. They hit it off right away and soon began living together. Elizabeth was aware of Frankie's drug use and saw the toll it was taking on him, so she convinced him to check himself into a Manhattan hospital to help cure his habit. After a short stay in rehab, Frankie had gotten clean, and for a moment the future looked bright for the young couple. In late 1963, Elizabeth gave birth to Frankie's only child, a baby girl named Francine. However, tragedy struck again when Francine sadly passed away just 2 days after her birth. Frankie took the loss of his daughter really hard, and it eventually led to him relapsing yet again. In early 1964, Frankie and Elizabeth got married, and later that year, Frankie returned to the studio and soon released 2 singles, To Each His Own and Teacher Teacher on 20th Century Fox, and Somewhere and Sweet and Lovely with Columbia Records. Both releases went almost unnoticed. Despite low record sales and ongoing struggles with addiction, he somehow managed to get booked at various clubs in the Apollo Theater. One night, Frankie's former bandmate, Jimmy Merchant, heard that Frankie was set to perform there and decided to go see him. I wanted to see him, so I went to the Apollo's backstage entrance. Mr. Spain, a cool black gentleman who worked there and knew me from my many appearances, let me right in. When Frankie came downstairs, we briefly chatted about our sad breakup before drugs entered the conversation. He promised to buy some for both of us after his last show that evening. When I returned later in need of a fix after a long wait, Mr. Spain looked at me sadly and said, "The entire building is empty, Jimmy." When I asked him about Frankie's whereabouts, he stated, "Frankie left a long time ago out the front doors." I was greatly disappointed in how Frankie let me down. Jimmy wouldn't hear from Frankie again until 1965 when Frankie sent Sherman Garnes a telegram that read, "Come see me now, money waiting." So, the Teenagers got together and went to visit Frankie. He informed them that a promoter was interested in getting the group back together, but he would not record any new material unless the entire original group could be reconstructed. Seeing that they were down to do it, Frankie then asked them if they would sing background on 2 of his songs. In his book, Jimmy Merchant said, "Herman was unavailable at the time. Nonetheless, the three of us got together and agreed to go to the downtown studio to back him up. Interestingly, Kenny Bobo from Jimmy Castor and the Juniors filled in for Herman for the 2 songs that Frankie wanted us to sing background on. The session went very well, but after backing up Frankie on those songs and waiting outside the recording studio for the promised $200 apiece, Frankie left us standing. Joe had reached his frustrating end and said, "That's it for me, no more." According to Jimmy, Kenny thought that Frankie had gone to a rehearsal studio, so they, along with Sherman, went there, and sure enough, they found him. As Frankie tried to work his way out the front door, Kenny violently grabbed him, but Sherman and Jimmy managed to separate them, and Frankie quickly ran away. This would be the last time Sherman, Joe, and Jimmy saw Frankie alive. His addiction was getting the best of him, and even though he still got gigs here and there, he eventually started missing shows, which led to promoters and club owners not wanting to work with him, and soon he wasn't being booked to perform anywhere. According to singer and New York DJ Bobby J, Frankie would go to the booking agencies and beg the bookers to try to get him a job. Still, no one wanted to work with him except for a popular disc jockey known as the Geeter with the Heater, who had once been the road manager for Danny and the Juniors. He began paying Frankie $150 to appear at record hops and lip-sync to his old records. Frankie would do this for a while, but it wasn't enough for him. So he went to Los Angeles and moved in with his old girlfriend, Zola Taylor of the Platters. Even though he was still married to Elizabeth, she didn't try to stop him because their relationship had gone sour due to constant fighting and drug use. Another reason she didn't try to stop him from going was because she figured there was nothing to worry about because, according to her, Frankie had always regarded Zola as his stage mother. Once in L.A., Zola helped Frankie get some gigs, the biggest one being Hollywood A Go-Go. While on the show, he lip-synced his hit songs Little Bitty Pretty One and Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Although this was meant to help Frankie and give his career the boost it so desperately needed, it wound up doing just the opposite. His appearance on the show showed just how far he'd fallen. Shortly after this, it was reported that Frankie and Zola had gotten married in Las Vegas. The two lived together in Zola's house until December of that year when Zola left to tour Japan with the Platters, leaving Frankie to take care of her house and financial affairs. She instructed him to pay the bills out of an allowance forwarded to him by her attorney. When she returned in April of 1966, the house was in foreclosure, and Frankie was gone with the money. "I'd have killed him, I was so angry, but I couldn't get my hands on him. I couldn't find him." Perhaps she couldn't find him because he had gone back home to New York, and according to Elizabeth and several others, Frankie claimed that his marriage to Zola was just a publicity stunt. At some point during his stay in California, Frankie was in need of money, so he contacted the owner of Roulette Records, Morris Levy, and sold him his rights to the song Why Do Fools Fall in Love for just $1,500. Now back home, and having gone through the $1,500 and the money that he had stolen from Zola, Frankie resorted to stealing to finance his habit. In February of 1966, he was arrested for stealing a set of drums from a recording studio, and he was later arrested on a heroin charge. It seemed all hope was lost. But then a man by the name of Sam Bray pulled Frankie out of the gutter, cleaned him up, and talked him into going to rehab. Frankie entered New York's Manhattan General Hospital and successfully completed a 33-day program. Once out, he signed a contract with Bray. It seemed like Frankie was a new person and he wanted to keep young people away from drugs. So fresh out of rehab, he was set to be the guest of honor at an outdoor block party held by a group of nuns in the Bronx section of New York. There he spoke to more than 2,000 teenagers. "I have been born again. I'm not ashamed to let the public know I took the cure. Maybe my story will keep some other kid from going wrong." Frankie's attitude was all positive, even though he was still awaiting trial, and many people didn't believe he had really changed. I know that many people aren't convinced that I have kicked the habit for good, but I know it, and that's the main thing. Sooner or later the skeptics will get around to believing me. Meanwhile, I'm content to wait. While waiting, Frankie and his new manager, Sam Bray, got to work on reviving his career. A star needs many things. He needs a repertoire of good arrangements, a flashy wardrobe, vocal coaching, things that cost big money. All that Frankie has going for him now is talent and guts. This was true, but the talent he possessed was truly remarkable. I sing in many languages: French, Italian, Spanish, Hebrew, Portuguese, and of course English. He also played the drums, the alto saxophone, the vibraphone, and he could also tap dance. Sam assured him that if he'd just stay clean, his name would be back on marquees within the year, and by the later part of the year, it was just as Sam had promised. Frankie was booked to perform at the Apollo, sharing the bill with Little Anthony and the Imperials. Frankie, however, wouldn't make it to the show. He'd be drafted into the U.S. Army in lieu of a jail sentence. He entered at Fort Hamilton, New York, but was soon moved to Fort Gordon, Georgia. Basic training is rugged and the discipline is strict, but it's necessary. It makes men of boys. While growing up in New York, I never had much discipline. As a child star, however, I was subjected to discipline from agents, managers, and lawyers. But it was a discipline that protected me from myself, so to speak. Army discipline, I think, teaches a man how to protect himself. It teaches him responsibility and how to stand on his own 2 feet. It makes him not only a good soldier, but a better individual. I know it's been good for me. It may have been good for him, but it didn't stop Frankie from going AWOL to perform in local nightclubs throughout the South. His love for the stage was something he just couldn't shake. But soon he'd meet a new love, a woman named E. Myra Eagle. It was love at first sight, and 3 months later, I persuaded her to marry me. The couple married on June 30th, 1967, and moved in with E. Myra's mother. As mentioned earlier, Frankie often went AWOL to perform in local nightclubs in the South because of his desire to sing and perform. So when he was presented with the opportunity to get back in the studio, he didn't waste much time. While on leave, he went back to New York for a recording session with producer Tom DeCillis. While back at home, Frankie ran into his former bandmate, Herman Santiago. Herman had this to say about their encounter. At the time, he was in the service. He was in Georgia. He came home from the service and we saw one another. We just talked and things like that. He looked very healthy, very good. He was looking forward to going into the studio. That's how he was the last time I saw him. Frankie soon got with DeCillis and recorded the song Apple Blossom Time. The record was shopped around to many different labels who liked it, one of those labels being Columbia, but they all decided to pass on it. Davy Jones of the Monkees had a production company and planned to release the record and have Frankie appear on a comeback episode of their TV show. But unfortunately, it never happened due to Frankie's reputation. With those plans falling through, Frankie returned to Georgia, and even though he'd faced a minor setback, he remained positive. He continued to write songs that he planned to record while also responding to thousands of letters from the parents of children who had taken the wrong path. On December the 22nd, 1967, Frankie was given a dishonorable discharge from the Army. Actually, the reason I became disenchanted with Army life is because I was not utilized as I thought I should have been. I was placed in special services and remained at Fort Gordon, Georgia. But I didn't have anything to do. I wanted to go places and do things, but I was made a garrison soldier and kept there. I got busted to private when my commanding officer wouldn't give me a pass to get married last June 30th. I went AWOL for 3 days and got married to the most wonderful woman who ever came into my life. Now out of the Army, Frankie began performing weekend gigs at different clubs and lounges, and according to E. Myra, it was around this time that she and Frankie started to discuss building a home and starting a family. But in February of 1968, Frankie received a call from Sam Bray asking him to come to New York. Frankie's initial response was, "Sam, please don't ask me to come back to that jungle." But after hearing that Bray wanted him to record new songs for a release on his Big Apple label, and that he had also set up a recording session with Roulette, Frankie agreed to go, but he didn't want to go by himself. He begged E. Myra to come with him, but she refused, saying she was the one with the, quote, real job. Frankie waited around for a couple of days, hoping E. Myra would change her mind, but she didn't, so he left. After a meeting with Sam, Frankie called E. Myra and told her that once he left New York, he was going to Europe as part of a review. He also told her that she could quit her job because he could take care of her. That night, he again met up with Bray. The two of them discussed a new song, a new soul sound, and soon they were in the studio laying down 2 new tracks. Frankie said, "I can't get over it. We picked a winner." Pleased with the new songs and excited for the session with Roulette, which was scheduled for the next day, Frankie headed to his grandmother's apartment. Just a few hours later, Frankie Lymon was found dead with a syringe next to him on his grandmother's bathroom floor. On February 27, 1968, the world of music lost a true pioneer. Though his short life was plagued with trouble, Frankie cemented his legacy as one of the greatest of all time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join us next time.